Welcome to the Ayurveda for Women's Health podcast, where we simplify ancient Ayurvedic wisdom into practical guidance for everyday life. Between the overwhelming wellness trends, quick fixes, and conflicting health advice out there, we return to a science that has been around for thousands of years. I'm Rita, an Ayurvedic health counselor.
And I'm Brittni, an Ayurveda practitioner. In a world that disconnects us from our bodies, we are here to guide you back. Through body literacy, practical tools, and time-tested science, we will help you step boldly into a more empowered, aligned version of yourself. So let's dive in. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Views expressed do not represent our employers. I'm so excited that we're live. Our podcast is live, and there's so many people that have already reached out and had a really awesome response to what we're doing and what we're talking about and what we're sharing. And I'm just so excited to be doing this. We just soft launched it today, so it's out in the world, and I'm happy to be chatting with you after after all the excitement as it goes out there for the first time.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It just feels really exciting to be doing it and to be hearing from people that they're excited about it and interested in learning more. I think, again, the conversation that we've had together and separately with so many people and clients and friends is just how wild it is that as women, we were never taught more about our bodies. Feels good to be creating a space where we can change that narrative.
Yeah. And especially with this topic today with menstrual imbalances and what that can look like in terms of understanding the menstrual cycle through the lens of the doshas. I think in a lot of what we've seen, the language that we see out there right now is that it's just kind of this blanket statement of, oh yeah, periods are awful and nobody wants them, and just take this, pill or have this IUD and like make it go away. And you don't have to deal with those imbalances, or you don't have to deal with this. Like, it's such a nuisance. And I think it's just so important to shift that language because there's not a lot of places that are looking at it through this Ayurvedic lens that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just take a pause and recommend that if whoever's listening to this didn't listen to our prior two episodes where we were diving deep into the menstrual cycle, taking you through each phase, talking about the really normal physiological changes that we have physically, mentally, emotionally, that's a good place to start because I think what can happen is we can see people pathologize these really normal changes that happen throughout the month. But then on the reverse side of that, we can see this normalization of pathology and this normalization of imbalance. And we can, like you're saying, hear people saying like, oh, like I have these really painful periods, but that's just the curse of being a woman. And so today, I think it will be really nice to get into the weeds, so to speak, and talk about, yes, there's very different versions of normal for different bodies. Healthy looks different in different bodies. But then there are symptoms and communication from the body in the menstrual cycle that we really don't want to ignore. We really look at the menstrual cycle in Ayurvedic medicine as being a window into what's going on in the body. The symptoms we see in the menstrual cycle give us so much information. So it's definitely something we don't want to ignore. And I'm excited to just shed some light on that for people today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end, we'll get into maybe a little bit more of like, what is it telling you? Like this different light of thinking about your menstruation and your menstrual cycle as a way to understand these other areas of your life and that where that alignment is or where it's not. It's understanding the person related to all of these other areas of their life, and it's not separate, and really using the menstrual cycle as this wisdom tool to help guide us toward our purpose and toward our dharma and toward, what is meant for us in life. So I think that can be such a powerful, more like spiritual connection to the menstrual cycle that I don't think I don't think the language out there is that's something that is possible. And I hope that this helps to add that layer of perspective into what it's actually offering.
Yeah, I hear you. I think for many women, it's even understanding that certain aspects of your life are connected to menstrual cycles. I think many women listening to this may be in a place of thinking of it as this very separate thing, where it may be a reflection of stress or trauma or deficiency or nutritional shifts that need to happen, or like you said, more emotional, spiritual, soul-based shifts that maybe the body is trying to nudge you towards. So yeah, there's so many different layers and so many different ways to explain it, and I think that's why we both love Ayurveda. Is it's looking at all of it. It's looking at the practical, tangible, herbs and nutrition and certain practices, as well as getting a bit ethereal with it all as well.
Yeah, and I'd say what I see a lot with working with athletes in their menstrual cycle is that there's very much this culture around performing and pushing and training through every phase. And we did talk a lot about that in the benefits of training around your cycle in the last episode. That's worth going back and listening to and like pausing and taking some notes as you're going through it. But I think it's such a cultural norm that is, well, I'm on my cycle, I'm still going to push. I talk to clients now and I'm recommending, right? Like, okay, scale back, like rest on your cycle and, everything we talked about in the last episode. And, I still have some clients that come back and say, oh, well, I felt fine. So I like went out and, did this long run and did this intense exercise and then I actually had all this pain and discomfort but I thought I was good. And it's shifting the language around how we support our menstrual cycle. So just kind of, I guess, calling that out in terms of what I see with athletes, because I'm just starting to see it in other areas where even coaches are like starting to structure training programs around female physiology. Like it's
Hmm.
just starting. And I am so excited to see it because it's something that we desperately need for athletes specifically, but even for all women that are moving through life with their menstrual cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, where do you want to jump in?
Maybe we start with, yeah, just what like that healthy with variation look like,
Yeah.
I guess, so to speak, like, right,
Yeah.
considering the Constitution role in it, where like the language with Ayurveda is a little bit different than other, systems where it's like, well, it looks like this. It's like very black and white. And real menstrual cycles aren't like that. And there's always variation to it. And yeah, like Rita, why don't you go ahead and give us a snapshot of what it looks like, and we'll talk through kind of those variations.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, when we're talking about a balanced cycle, let's first start maybe and talk about how frequently the cycle's coming. So, the length of the cycle, a range of usually 26 to 32 days is what we say in Ayurvedic medicine. And that is looking from day one of your first bleed through day one of your next bleed. And so, if you are more of a pitta constitution, you're likely to have a little bit of a shorter window there and maybe be more on that 26 side. Or if you have a kapha constitution, you're likely to be more on the 32 there. So, I think it's a good call out that it's not that one is better than the other, or that you want to land right in the middle of that range. It's like you're saying, there's some normal range there. And then the bleed itself, typically we'll see a bleed last 3 to 5 days. And so again, with more of a vata constitution, it's likely going to be a little lighter. You'll be closer to that 3. Pitta might be a bit in the middle. And then kapha, we're likely going to see that full 5 days range. And so if we are consistently seeing, I'm only bleeding for 1 day, or I'm only bleeding for 2 days, or I'm bleeding for 7, 8, 9, again, I think it's important we're not always just thinking like, oh, it's balanced and it's good, or it's imbalanced and it's bad. It's communication. It's an indication of something that's going on in the whole body. And along with that, length of the bleed itself, we really want the bleed to have a smooth, easy start and a smooth, easy end. So we don't want to see necessarily like spotting for 4 days before your bleed starts or at the end of your bleed. Same idea. This spotting. We'll talk about what that can be communicating. And then the blood itself, we want to see a bright red blood that's nice and smooth without, significant clots or too dark. That can be a sign that the blood's a little bit stagnant, that it's been sitting in the body longer. So we want to see that bright red blood. And like we talked about on the last couple episodes, it's normal to feel some level of fullness in the womb space. I would say, like, for me, I always can tell when I'm on my period. There's a little less space in that area of my body. That there's a difference between getting that sensation and having pain. And I think that's a big thing we'll distinguish today is that pain and cramps, that's not again just a curse of having a period. That's definitely a sign that something else is going on in the body. And energy wise, like we talked about in the last cycle, we're going to see that normal dip, that less motivation to be in the external world. But if we're seeing extreme exhaustion or, an extreme of emotions, really, that can also be a sign of some excess going on in the body. And then the last one that comes to mind is to just talk about quantity when we're talking about a balanced cycle. And I actually think the Ayurvedic lens on this is really cool because Ayurveda uses one's own body to dictate measurements. So there's a measurement called an Anjali, which essentially, if you took your hands and cupped it, that's considered one Anjali. And so it's this idea that that quantity of how much liquid's going to fit in a cupped hand is going to be different for me in my 5'9" body than for you, Brittni. And are you like around
I'm
5 feet
five.
tall?
I'm 5'2".
5'2", yeah. So in the Ayurvedic text, it talks about 4 Anjalis is about the quantity that we can see in a bleed. I just really like that concept that if you look at the size of your hands, that's probably a reflection of the overall size of your body and your size of your uterus. And so we're going to see some different changes there and how much you bleed in relation to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece of this because I see so often the question, well, like, how much should I bleed? And I think people are, kind of seeking that exact number. And just like you're saying, Rita, it's just so dependent on the person. And you have to take into context, the constitution. If we think about how many menstrual cycles we have, we start to see patterns and see what happens over time. And so that gives us information too, where it's like, oh, okay, I've been bleeding this much, for this amount of time and I don't have other symptoms. And this is kind of my baseline, right? Like this is what I know is my healthy. And or the opposite where, oh, that I've been bleeding this much, but I also have a lot of other symptoms that I'm managing and discomfort that I'm managing. Okay, well, let's reassess that and take that whole picture into consideration when we're trying to determine what is a healthy amount for your body type and for your constitution.
Yeah, and because I'm almost thinking too, like, I agree with what you're saying. It's important for all of us to know our norms, but I also think for many of us, we've experienced these imbalanced cycles for most of our bleeding lives, and maybe our moms and our grandmas also had similar imbalanced cycles. And so I do think that like, I remember working with a client who was just like, "Oh, I think this is just how I bleed, like, it's really, really heavy," and they were Pitta Kapha constitution, and I was like, "Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense," but then what she noticed was her bleed ended up lightening, not to, she's still somebody who's gonna have to be changing her period underwear very regularly, like, I think it's still her norm, but sometimes I think we can be experiencing an extreme of our norm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Maybe I can clarify. Like, I've seen clients where they may have a heavy bleed in a kapha constitution. Like, they might bleed a little bit longer than 5 days, but they're not having symptoms that they're managing. And they're not having discomfort, like there's no other signs that their body's indicating that something's off. And sometimes I see that shift with the season. Right,
Mm.
and, like, I've had clients say their bleed might get lighter in the summer, maybe heavier in, like, the winter, or even spring, like, the body's kind of flush. So I think that that could be a consideration too, as where I feel like it's a lot to consider, and that's kind of the point, is that it's not this black and white, "This is what your menstrual cycle should look like." There's kinda all these variations to it and context that we're considering.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are very good points, definitely. And in the season piece too, I definitely see that in my bleed, and I've also talked with clients about that.
Yeah, which is so fascinating to me, like how connected we are to nature in that sense, where the body is naturally adjusting. And so sometimes it's not a sign of imbalance. Sometimes it's like helping us, right?
Mm.
If it's, if it is the summertime and you're bleeding a little bit more, it can be the body working some of that heat out. And that's its opportunity to cool the system a little bit. I mean, I think it can be a good sign, right? But we also want to like consider the context of everything else and the other signals of communication.
And I also think I like to take a couple of cycles whenever we're kind of looking and analyzing. Like, I think, if you do have a significant thing happen in a cycle, I do think it's worth tuning into and being curious about. But to your point, I think the more I learn, the less I know. Right. And it's like there's so many different factors, and the body has so much intelligence. And so, yeah, we want to have this awareness of what's balanced and what's our norm, and then also not be too hyper aware when shifts are happening and try to stay in that curious mindset.
Yeah, I agree. I think that curiosity is a big piece where instead of feeling like, that fear or shame or whatever emotions that might initially come up, just kind of like take that pause and step back and be like, okay, like this is curious. Like, what is this telling me? What am I feeling right now? And I think that's part of that bigger wisdom piece that is the menstrual cycle, is that it's it's working whether we do anything or not, right? Like it's connecting to us, it's connecting to nature, and there's always something deeper that it's wanting to share with us. And it's whether
Mm.
we're paying attention or tuning in and getting curious in that moment is whether, the medicine's available to us or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's jump in. Let's talk a little bit when we talk about imbalances, or again, we're very much wording this as communication from the body, right? We tend to notice these three different patterns where, if you've been listening to some of our prior episodes, you might be getting some familiarity with the concept of the three doshas: vata, pitta, and kapha energetics. These energetic qualities that we see in pattern in nature and in us. And that's how we categorize menstrual cycle imbalances too. So that's how we're going to take this conversation, is to go through some different things that we see that fall under this vata category, this pitta category, and kapha category, and then hopefully tie it all together as well. So maybe, Brittni, do you want to start us off and talk a little bit about the vata category of menstrual imbalances?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about vata, again, we're looking at qualities. So we're thinking about dry, cold, rough, and irregular. And that's the foundational understanding of vata and the elements that exist within vata, which is space and air. So if we're thinking about these qualities relative to the menstrual cycle, that irregularity can show up as longer or shorter. Like you're not going to be spot on the same day every month, right? Like that's more of a pitta. Pitta is very precise. But the vata might like fluctuate, right? Like, oh, this month I was 26 and next month I was 32, right? That can be a sign that a little extra vata going on, right? If it is fluctuating a lot, especially if there's like really extreme swings in the cycle. The bleed is going to be on the lighter side, right? We talked about that 3 to 5 day range. We're going to see more of that like 3 day range of bleeding. If we're seeing less than that, that certainly is an imbalance of vata, more excess vata that needs to be addressed. But again, that lightness correlates to that air quality and that space quality. So we're seeing that in the movement of the menstrual cycle, where there's probably less blood tissue in the body to begin with, and there's less that needs to be expelled, right? Because the body is like kind of needs more blood in the tissue as opposed to getting rid of more blood.
Mm.
So that's a sign that vata is constitutionally at play in that type of cycle. And other signs would be constipation around the bleed. That I actually love how you described it, Rita, in our notes, where we're thinking about apana vayu and that energy that is moving downward in the body, specifically in the lower region of the body. And when that happens with menstruation, right, it can create a juxtaposition of energy in
Mm.
that
Like
area.
abruptly so, too. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's like very abrupt, this energy that kind of comes out of nowhere. So that apana vayu is helping to move energy down, but if there's a lot of energy moving up in the body, that can also create some pain or stagnation in that area of the pelvic region, which we can see that as constipation.
Yeah, I think we've said this on past episodes, and you described it well, but I think just reinforcing anytime we see pain, that's really stagnation. So when we're thinking about period cramps in that area or pain from constipation in that area, it's that sign of stagnation that you're describing. There's this competing movement of energy that's happening there, and that pain might also be in the lower back too. I think that can be really common when people are holding excess vata, especially in that area of the body. There can be a lot of back pain associated with that bleed.
hmm Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's if we think about anatomically, like that's where the end part of the colon is, right in that lower area of the back. And so if you're experiencing constipation, that can be contributing to some of that stagnation, which is causing that lower back pain. So being mindful of that, like if you know that that's your tendency, right? And we'll go back to our other conversation about digestion, right? This is
Mm.
where we make sure we're supporting digestion, especially leading up to your bleeding days, because we want to make sure that the tissue that's supposed to be moving down and out is moving down and out and not getting stuck. And that tissue, right, being from any of like from the colon, from the uterus, any of those areas that are coming, even the bladder, right? Like not holding it in, not waiting till the last second to go pee, right? If you have to go, not holding in those urges, like allowing that to move out of the body to allow that natural energy to move in the direction that it's intended to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And in general, warm, cooked, well spiced foods, especially in those days leading up to the bleed, can just support that down and out motion. Certain teas and herbs that can support that down and out motion can be really helpful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And thinking from, even the emotional piece
Mm.
that many can experience with this type of menstrual cycle is the anxiety and insomnia. And I've experienced this in the past too when I was really struggling with painful periods. And the anxiety piece, again, we're thinking about where energy is going, and there's a lot of upward moving energy, right? And that's where we can feel unstable and we can feel unsettled. That can feel very powerful and overtaking of your body at the same time. And again, we're balancing with that grounding, warm, soft, gentle. It's all opposite qualities to the dry, cold, rough, irregular. And that's how, that's a warm blanket. It's resting. It's like all of those very basic, like ways of addressing it. But it's where I've actually seen the most impact, especially with clients, is to do these like simple practices can really help ease a lot of that tension and that upward moving energy. Um, and the insomnia piece is we're thinking about, well, that energy is locating somewhere, right? And it's locating in the mind. And so when we're at this place of rest, this time of rest in the evening, the mind is still moving, and that mind still has that vata air space quality, like that wind is circulating and circulating. And that's not allowing us to fully rest and to drop into that state of detoxification and that's that deep rest state and that REM state, because the mind is moving, right? And then if we're not sleeping, we kind of continue to push this state of depletion. And we already know that vata type constitutions are just more prone to being depleted, right? Because they have less tissue that makes up their body, like we talked about in the Constitution episode. So being really mindful with Vata imbalances, a little bit can go a long way with balancing them because they feel things more quickly than, say, a Kapha constitution. So it
Mm,
might sound really subtle where I'm recommending we'll lay on the floor with a warm blanket and socks on and, some gentle music. That can really soothe some of these extreme emotions because Vatas will feel that very quickly because they don't have as much in the way necessarily of like there's like less tissue in the way. They're going to feel that warmth really fast.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the deficiency part is a good call out because I do think that when I think of Vata type category of menstrual imbalances and menstrual symptoms, I think that directional piece is a big part of it. And then that deficiency piece can also be a big factor where we've talked a little bit before, but there's these 7 layers of tissues in Ayurvedic physiology, and our reproductive tissues, that's our last layer. And so if there's some nutrient deficiency in the body, then you can essentially think of it as there's not enough to go around where, that's getting circulated and it's feeding each of the tissues, but there's not enough left once we get to that reproductive layer. And so that can also be a really big factor with these Vata type imbalances, especially I think when we're seeing like missing cycles, like when people lose their menstrual cycle for a period of time, that deficiency piece can be a really big factor. Or if we're just having really, really scanty cycles or feeling extreme exhaustion or even intense cravings during the cycle. And again, everything comes back to digestion and nutrition and that aspect. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And super important. I see this with athletes too. Just like you're saying, that missing cycle, we're looking at that deficiency and that depletion aspect of it. And also red S, so relative energy deficiency syndrome, right? That's
Mm,
really common. And I've worked with clients with that have had that in the past and really are being diligent about not letting that happen again. And the clients that I've seen with that are Vata type constitutions. And so it's just easier for them to go into that deficient state because they're not starting with a lot to begin with. And so being really mindful of supporting the menstrual cycle through all of the ways we're talking about becomes really crucial for vatas to sustain their energy and to have enough energy to keep going. And that's where this cycle has that natural like building phase and rest phase, and we build
mm.
and rest and build and rest. And if we're honoring that through our training, through our movement, through activity, through our scheduling, all of those ways, that looks different for a Vata person than it does for a Kapha person because Kaphas can go a little bit longer. They can have a little bit more social time and be okay. But Vatas really need to protect that to not let them go past that threshold because they can go there very quickly.
Yeah, and I actually have a client I'm working with who lost her cycle in relation to a physical and emotional trauma. And we've been doing quite a bit and we've made so much progress in so many aspects of the nervous system and digestion. But where we're at now in supporting the cycle coming back is we're actually honoring that rest cycle. Even though she's not bleeding, we're honoring that around the new moon. So each new moon, she's like taking a couple days. She's cutting back on her physical exercise. She's doing more like gentle vinyasa and easier to digest foods and kind of living that cyclical life to support her period coming back. We just started this, so I can't report back yet. And in addition with, the nutrition and the herbs and all those factors, but she feels really good in doing that and living that way and feels like she's welcoming in her cycle. And I think that she'd be happy for me to pass it along to others who are experiencing amenorrhea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. And it really speaks to how the body wants to move in rhythm. So just honoring that. That sounds like such a beautiful way to invite the menstrual cycle back
Yeah.
and be like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm ready for you. Like, I'm prepared. I now can move in this cycle already. Like, the rhythm is here when you're ready. And just being patient with like that process of supporting the body and saying, hey, I'm here. I'm ready. When you're ready, come on back.
Well, and letting the body know it's safe to come back, right? I
Yeah.
do think that can be a factor with amenorrhea as well. And again, I do think it's not uncommon that amenorrhea can happen after a traumatic event. Again, the body's in this state of prioritizing energy to other things if safety is a concern. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Right. Because the body is always going to prioritize survival. So, yeah, that's a really important piece. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
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 Good. Well, maybe just to like recap Vata. So we're
Yeah.
thinking qualities dry, cold, rough, irregular, and that can show up as a lighter bleed, more scanty bleed, constipation around bleeding, lower back pain, even stiffness in the body, right? That rigidity, like less flexibility feeling, less juiciness to the body. And then more emotional, like that anxiety and insomnia can be a piece. So those would all be signs of a Vata type constitution, and certainly many ways that we can, support that with Ayurveda.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I just want to clarify too, because you said Vata constitution. I think there's a lot of confusion I know what you meant by that.
Okay.
But I think there's a lot of confusion sometimes around like, well, is it just my constitution or is it in
Mm,
balance?
mhm,
And I think, one of the things that maybe we should call out is the actual definition of dosha,
mm.
right? Like dosha is describing a quality that's in excess. And so, yes, we have these different constitutions and these qualities that are in excess in our body, and that's just our normal. But when we see these symptoms, when we see these doshas, when we see these qualities, it's again this communication that we need to shift in an opposite direction to balance. Um, did I explain that, or
You
do you want to
did,
add
yeah,
anything to
and
that?
that's
Okay.
it's a really good point, and I'm glad you clarified because, for example, when I was experiencing a lot of imbalances, and I'm a Pitta predominant constitution, right? I know that now, but at the time, I was having a lot of Vata imbalances, so I was seeing that scanty blood flow. I was like having some irregular cycles. Um, I was seeing some Pitta qualities too that we'll talk about, but the anxiety piece was like very prevalent for me too. So yeah, it is understanding it it's multi-layered and understanding it from the constitution piece, but also understanding the imbalance piece. But again, we're always going to address the imbalance first. That can help you start to understand what healthy is for you and how to balance it.
Hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
helpful?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. I think part of that is just in Western culture, we're really taught to think like this is normal, this is abnormal, right?
Right.
And so I think it can be really hard to grasp this concept of like, oh, these are qualities in my body, and this is how I balance the qualities in my body.
Right, right. Because then it is like even when I have gotten to a place where I'm having healthy cycles, I know what my baseline is. I still, there are still times where I see Vata imbalances within my menstrual cycle. And again, it comes back to what you're saying, Rita, where it's like that's a signal. That's that communication. Be like, oh, hey, there's a little too much excess Vata going on. This needs to be addressed before it continues down this trajectory even though I'm a Pitta constitution. So any constitution can experience any of these imbalances. We're addressing the imbalance first to help bring you back to baseline.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a good, clear way to say it. Yeah. Good. Good. Okay. Should we move on to Pitta?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. So Pitta category types of menstrual symptoms. So Pitta is the embodiment of fire and water. And so when we're describing something as Pitta, we're describing something that is hot, sharp, mobile, and intense. So I like to think of Pitta category menstrual symptoms as angry cycles. We're thinking about the qualities of fire. Fire really opens things up, or you could say warmth and heat opens up channels. Cold is going to cause things to tighten and constrict. Warmth and heat is going to cause channels to widen and open and allow things to flow. I mean, you can even think of like if you have wooden doors in your house and in the summertime when it's hot and that's expanding, that wood is expanding, your doors might catch on the floor. So when we have this excess of heat and fire in our body and particularly in our womb space, when we have these menstrual cycles, they're going to be quite literally hot and heavy because we're going to see more of that blood flowing from that heat. And so that can look like cycles that are short. It can mean heavy bleeds where we're seeing again this very rapid movement of tissue flowing out of the womb space. And with that heat, we might also see redness in the skin or acne, breakouts, rashes. There's also that excess flow perhaps going on in the bowels, and there's loose stool or diarrhea happening around the menstrual cycle. You can also have like a burning sensation, and or the blood can just kind of feel hot as it's coming out. There can be a fleshy odor associated with pitta type bleeds, and also, headaches can be a big one, and headaches and migraines. And we've talked in the past about how heat rises. So we think of this excess heat that's really being seen and during the cycle, again, it's your window into what's going on in the body. So if there's a lot of excess heat going on, then headaches and migraines might really show themselves around this part of the cycle.
Yeah, because just like you're saying, the channels are more open too, so that blood
Yes.
flow can just like flush up if that energy is moving upward, and then you get this like rush of blood to the brain, and that can be part of causing that migraine too, like extra pressure in the head because the channels are more open and flowing with heat and they're
Yeah.
more inflamed. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And with that too, I see a lot of acne as well. You're talking about like the skin redness, and a very common sign is that acne around the chin
Mm.
area, and that is again that heat is moving upwards and kind of like relocating in some area of the body. But again, that it's trying to push itself out. It's trying to like move out and release itself. And part of how the body can release what's inside is through the skin.
Hmm.
And so that heat is trying to escape essentially, right? And it comes out in these very inconvenient places sometimes. But again, that is a sign of that excess heat and that fire moving rapidly upward in the body and
Yeah.
trying to escape.
Yeah, and I can't remember if I already said this, but anger and irritability, where, vata, we might see more of the anxiety and insomnia. In pitta excess cycles, we might see more anger and irritability. And that might be during the bleed itself. It might be in the luteal phase. We talked in the last couple episodes about how the luteal phase is the pitta part of the cycle. And so that could be also what people think of as PMS symptoms. I think of as a pitta category there, especially if there's some irritability and anger components going on there as well.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of the water component comes into play
Mm.
too, with a lot of breast tenderness, right? And that swelling in the breast, even some like bloating in the stomach. If you're just like holding on to more water, that can we'll talk about kapha, but holding on to that retention and that water can be part of that pitta sign as well, especially in the breast tissue, because that's where we hold estrogen too, and it's gonna gravitate towards that estrogen. So yeah, just another sign that, and I used to experience this a lot. In my cycles, I would have like few days before bleeding, I would have night sweats. I'd be really
Mm.
hot. I would like soak through my pajamas, and um super sore breasts. Like I would have to hold them like walking around. They would hurt so much. It was all of this excess heat going on. And I haven't experienced that in a very long time now, but it was when I was having a lot of those other symptoms. And so just to highlight that too, like I was experiencing those physical symptoms and the anxiety. So like I was
Mm.
addressing
Good call out.
both. Yeah, like addressing both pitta and vata in a lot of how I was addressing it. It's not usually there's overlaps in the cycles and in imbalances
Yes.
that we're seeing because they are related, right? Like they're not isolated from each other. So just an awareness piece that they can overlap in that way. Um and the other thing that was very common is like that intensity you're talking about with cravings specifically for greasy, salty, oily,
Mm.
fatty foods. And that I'll give you an example because it was like so extreme. It was like quite comical now that we think back on it. But I just remember this one cycle and I was like, John, I need something greasy. Like, I just need something so greasy right now. It was like this such an intense need of like a cheeseburger or like French fries. And so we went out and got it, right? And I was like, this is just what I need right now. But it's this sign of like pitta is so exacerbated that it's like is increasing like, where we get to a point where the body is no longer seeking balance and it's trying to exacerbate what's already there. And that's where I was at with it. Like that intensity, it was like more fire, like let's keep this fire burning. And so obviously was not supportive to like eat that in that moment, but at the time I didn't really understand what was going on. And now we know these other like more helpful, tools to support that and to balance that, where we're going in that, looking for balancing those qualities, right? And softening and something gentle as opposed to adding fuel to the fire.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, because essentially when the heat is there, we can talk about bringing in things to cool, but I think the first priority is we have to look at where the heat is coming from and where we can reduce that. And sometimes that might be excess heat from maybe you're doing hot yoga or spending a lot of time in saunas, or maybe there's a lot of spicy food or alcohol or coffee, which are both heating, or like garlic and onions even, or things that are pungent that we're bringing into the body. But I also think a big one for pitta cycles, and I say this from a lot of experience, is is a lot of excess heat in the mind, right? And that can be, I think in some cases that can be like anger or angst of some kind that hasn't been processed. I think in other cases it can be like even it's interesting when I am experiencing excess pitta in my mind, which is most days, it can even be about things that I'm excited about, right? Like even with this podcast and kind of coming to the push of getting things out there and like being really excited about it, but having a lot of thoughts about it and a lot of actions and plans and rehashing plans. And I think if we're just in this place where our mental fire is going and going and going, even if it's something we're excited about, it can still be excess, and it can still be contributing to excess heat in the body if we're not taking space to cool off.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Again, we're thinking about that energy piece, right? Like if you're, like you're saying, like motivated and driven and like the like constant movement, you can be creating a lot of friction, right? And that friction is going to create heat, like that sparking that fire. And so yeah, that mental piece is such a big part of it. I think especially for pittas, because they are always going to want to be, um, moving forward, thinking of the next thing, checking things off the to-do list and getting things done. Like, I don't have time for dealing with my menstrual cycle. I'm going to like continue on this project that I'm so psyched about. And
Mhm.
that's like that, to your point, Rita, that can just create more inflammation because we're not actually bringing balance to the body. We're doing something in an extreme way. And I do want to highlight, because this recently came up with a client of mine where we've been working together for a few months and to address painful cycles, painful periods specifically. And they got to a really good place and were like feeling better with their cycles, having great digestion, seeing a lot more consistency and regularity, except they started doing saunas like 3 or 4 days a week. And their very next cycle, super painful, extremely
Yeah.
painful, like back to debilitating, like could not, stand up. And I just want to highlight that because I see it so often and I know that it's like such a culture right now, but sauna should be approached as a medicine and not as like a daily routine or ritual or habit. Like it's a medicinal therapy to use in an appropriate way. And I call that out because I just see it so often, and to see it come up in a menstrual situation specifically, where that was like the one big change that they made. And what that does is it depletes going back to the deficiency conversation with vata and having pain and stagnation. Like it was like depleting their blood supply
Mm,
and creating this deficiency in the body and in that blood tissue.
mm.
Um, a little bit of a tangent, but you had mentioned the sauna piece, and I just think it's so relevant to so many people right now. And I think the connection between menstrual cycles and something like that is very overlooked.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good call out. I had a teacher say to me once that essentially when there's excess pitta, we need to not add any heat at all. And I think that can even be, and again, like tune into what your body is showing because everyone's going to be different. But even like when I think about putting a hot pack on your womb space, I think there's this understanding that that's supportive for all cycles. I think that can actually be detrimental for pitta cycles. Um, or I came across recently online this video where somebody was talking about how she tried castor oil packs and it like completely messed up her body on multiple levels. And hearing her symptoms, I'm like, oh yeah, because you had a lot of pitta and a lot of heat going on in your body. And castor oil is really, it's a medicine. It's a powerful medicine. And we'll talk about it, especially when we talk about kapha. And I also have used castor oil packs for a lot of people with some vata things. It opens up the channels. But if you already have that excess heat flowing through you and your channels are already open and you already have this like excess flow of fluid, this looser stool, this heavier bleed, we do not want to bring in more of that heat and more of that opening. So no, I think it's a good call out because I think there are certain practices that we think of as just being good for us or bad for us. And we need to always bring it back to, well, what are the qualities of that practice and what are the qualities going on in the body? And I will just say and do a little call out because we're talking so much about removing heat. I do think when there's excess pitta going on, bringing in cooling substances can be so supportive. And I'll just share two of my absolute favorites. One is aloe vera juice. I am such a big lover of aloe vera juice, and both in how it's supported my body and my clients' bodies. And again, not for everybody, and we have to look and see how we're using it and when we're using it. But aloe vera juice can be so supportive for excess pitta. Making sure it's inner fillet because whole leaf is going to be laxative. So don't do that if you don't need that for sure. But the other one I wanted to call out is like cooling herbal infusions and bringing in infusions of herbs that are naturally cooling and astringent and can just be so supportive because I think of these substances, these like juices and herbal teas, but that we can even drink as a room temperature. I'm actually sipping on one right now. It's directly going to impact rasa, our first layer of tissue, and also have this direct impact on our blood. And so if we have this excess heat going on in our blood, then it can really just help to cool that off on so many levels. So, always individualized and, never take anything that we say on here is without knowing it's supportive for your body. I just think when we're talking about all the things to remove, I also want it to be clear that a lot of what we're doing when we're supporting women in their cycles is adding in some things as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah, it's not, yeah, because it's not about taking away and restricting or depleting yourself of something. It is just bringing in the supportive pieces to balance the qualities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
really great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we, anything else come to mind on pitta or should we move on into kapha?
Maybe just a short recap
For sure.
for pitta because I know we talk about so many aspects of it. So yeah, again with pitta we're thinking hot, sharp, intense qualities. Even that oily quality can be present. The fires their channels are open, things are moving really fast and very intensely. And so we see that with heavy bleeding, short cycles, skin redness, acne, anger and irritability, that more emotional piece can really be present. In the bowels, more looser stools or frequent looser stools. Burning sensation, right? Again, that inflammation, that heat piece is like trying to escape the body somewhere. That fleshy odor, right? That kind of like tissue, like body odor kind of scent. And tender breasts and PMS. Night sweats too. We talked about that too. It was a
Yeah.
really big piece. Um, Yeah, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
that's Pitta in a nutshell.
So then when we move into kapha, so kapha is the energetics of earth and water. So when we're talking about the qualities of earth and water, the qualities of kapha, we're talking about some heaviness, some dampness, some slowness, perhaps some stickiness, if you think about mud and that like sticky component to it. So, one thing that I think is an important call out that we've already mentioned is just if you have more kapha in your constitution, again, you're going to have heavier bleeds because there's just more liquid to you. There's more juiciness to you, which we've talked in our prior episodes about all the benefits of that. But one that maybe, people won't enjoy, but it's just part of the body is having those heavier, longer bleeds in kapha constitutions. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and with that, I'd say they can see the longer cycles, right? So you might be bleeding more, but you're also going to have a similar amount of space between your cycles relatively to like how long you're bleeding. And I have seen that before where it's slow, right? It's like that
Hmm.
slow onset of a cycle. It's like giving the body some time to ease into it and to move into it without rushing into it like a vata or, really fast like a pitta. It is this like slower pace. And so you can see those like 32 days, but you're having a few more days of bleed, right? So there is this like softness to what's happening.
Yeah, and when we are having this excess of these qualities, you mentioned earlier, we can see a lot of water retention. So a lot of bloating and fullness in the body, but more a water retention type. And we also can see some of that stickiness, and that could look like sluggish digestion or sticky stools. Or we might see some stickiness in the blood itself, like some mucus clots in the blood. Or the other piece, and I'm jumping here, but kapha is, you can think of earth and water, there's like substance to it. And so we can also see if people have this excess kapha, this excess substance and growth going on in the body, then we can see things like fibroids and cysts and these really, really common experiences for women that fall under this category.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, like, with those again, we're thinking about stagnation. We've
Mm,
we've talked about this in the digestion episode,
yeah.
where if that estrogen's not moving out of the body, it's
Yes.
that building hormone, and if it's staying stuck, right? And so if you're having that sluggish digestion, things aren't really detoxing out of the body, that estrogen is going to get reabsorbed into the body, and that can lead to something like fibroids or cysts because it's a growth type hormone. It's going to grow somewhere. So if it's being recirculated, it's going to create growth somewhere else in the body. So again, that's where like supporting digestion, especially if like you get more sluggish around menstruation, really being supportive in keeping things moving consistently and easily at that time of the month.
Yeah. Yeah. And then to bring in the mental emotional side with kapha, again, in the same pattern we're seeing of this kind of sluggishness, this stagnation, this slowness, we can also mentally see some depression. Depression, of course, you can think of as sadness, but I think of it can also be numbness too, of just feeling very disconnected from your world and your life and your people.
Yeah, more of like that withdrawal
Yes.
sense,
Yeah.
and just kind of pulling back and not engaging. It's that heavy quality, it's that slower quality, and it's easier to withdraw and stay, disconnected from others.
Yeah. Yeah, and so with all of these symptoms in this category of symptoms, really, what we need to do is bring in the opposite qualities. So if there's too much slowness and stagnation and heaviness, we need to bring in some things to invigorate the body and then some mobilizing qualities, some drying qualities, heating qualities. And so we can do that with food, we can do that with herbs, we can do that with movement practices. I mentioned castor oil packs initially. That can be, especially for those growths, castor oil packs essentially have this ability to break up stagnation in the body. So those can be really powerful if done right for women experiencing a lot of that stagnation in the pelvic region.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and we do have a video on that. Rita has a great video on how to use castor oil packs in the wellness library. So if that is something that you are experiencing that and you're having these qualities that we're describing related to kapha, that would be a great place to explore next.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think depending on how adventurous that you wanna go too with, cycle practices, I think when we have some of that stagnation, I also think about yoni steaming as being really supportive for that, which if someone's not familiar with that practice, we're essentially boiling herbs into water, and then it gets a little tricky because you have to kind of create a chair of sorts that you can sit on, but you're sitting above this steaming pot. And that steam, that herb filled steam, is then coming up into your yoni in obviously a way that's safe and you're not burning yourself. But while we can shift around the herbs and do that for different constitutions, the steam itself is something that's going to also create a lot of mobilization. And we can think of that steam as really opening up the channels and being supportive there. So maybe something that Pitta's, again, maybe not a good fit, unless it's perhaps used in a certain way, ceremoniously, let's say. But something like that can be really supportive and really cool and powerful. And yeah, I think it's a really powerful experience. We could talk a lot about that. But specifically, if you're experiencing some of those growths and stagnation in the womb space, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe we need to either do an episode or a wellness library on on yoni steaming because there's a lot to talk about and there can be nuance to it. But I started incorporating that into my self-care routine around my menstrual cycle a few years ago, I think. And it's been really nice to use different herbs for different purposes depending on how that cycle felt for me. I don't do it every cycle, but when I do use it, just like you're saying, it's very intentional. It can be very like ceremonious is when I'm using it as opposed to just, oh, I stopped bleeding, I'm going to do it like every
Hmm.
cycle, right? It's very intentional is when I use it as a therapy, but doing it after you're done bleeding, right? Making sure that all of that downward energy is complete and, there's no residue left. But then it can be so like relaxing to have as part of that entering that next phase of the cycle and feeling like you really are honored that cycle, just noticing how it felt for you and kind of completing it the same way that we would have, light a candle or have an altar. We're giving our body these herbs of like a thank you for supporting me this month. And now, here's a nice like cleanse or however the
Mm.
cycle felt, right? We can use different herbs for different energies of what we're looking to accomplish. But it can be a really nice way to connect more intimately with
Mm.
yourself too, which I don't think is something that we're really taught in how to
Mm.
do that in like a non-sexualized way,
Yeah.
right? And just to be very present and connected to yourself.
Yeah, and I think it can also be really powerful used ceremoniously, just like you're describing, if there has been some kind of traumatic event, a pregnancy loss or any kind of trauma, or even the end of a relationship, the end of a period in your life, of thinking of a way to just kind of cleanse out and close out. I think ceremonies in general hold so much power, but especially one that's connected to our womb space. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about blood clots
Mm.
because I'm curious in your thoughts on this because we haven't talked about this. But one thing that's confused me about blood clots in all of my, learnings and different mentors and different books that I've read, I've seen them categorized as in different ways. I've seen them categorized as pitta, I've seen them categorized as kapha, I've even seen them categorized as vata. And so I've kind of come to my own conclusion with blood clots that I think they can be any of the above. And, if we think about blood clots and what's happening, it's essentially blood that's pooling in the uterus. And that can happen either when the blood is, again, it's kind of stagnant, it's pooling, it's not leaving the body as quickly as it should. And that is something that we might see again in vata, where there's some blockage to that down and out movement, or even kapha, where there's this like thicker, slower moving blood. But then I also think that the blood clots can happen when we're experiencing pitta and the blood is moving out very quickly. And essentially, when our uterine lining sheds and there are these anticoagulation enzymes that are released to allow the blood to fully thin out, if the blood's releasing faster, then we're able to have that anticoagulation happen. It's like we'll see those chunks of tissue in the blood itself. So that's what I've come to with blood clots because it's something I think that's like a hugely common experience for women. And it's one that I have always been confused about. It's definitely something I have seen in my bleeds as well. I'm curious if you have other thoughts or if you agree with my theory that it can be any of the above or what you're thinking there.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you said that because I've had a similar experience in my trainings where I've heard different perspectives. And I've heard, different Ayurvedic doctors say like, oh, it's very much kapha if you have clots, and oh, it's very much vata if you have clots. And so I've heard like very strong, more black and white, like, oh, this is a sign of this imbalance. But I agree with you because I've seen it in very different contexts. And so I've never seen it be like, oh, you have clots, like that's very kapha. Like I can see there's a lot of vata imbalances going on and see clotting. And I'm like, that's really curious. Like, why is that? And I think in some ways, I think that like the way that I think about vata is if there's a lack of movement, there's going to be stagnation. And that stagnation to me can indicate some stickiness.
Mm.
Right? And like some stuckness of the blood and it's kind of sticking together. I also see that with kapha, where kapha is mud and sap and earth, and that's going to be sticky. I think even pitta has that oily quality to itself and the heat quality. So I think if you're having really hot blood and there's some stickiness, like to me, that's an additional sign of that pitta just kind of clumping the blood together, or that heat like clumping the blood together because that oiliness is going to be sticky anyways. So I agree. I think the nuance really makes sense with this. I'm really, really glad you brought it up in this way. I think it's really relevant to a lot of people probably listening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm glad you
Yeah.
agree. It's like been driving me crazy.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
my true pit of fashion being like, well, like you said, this doctor said this. And I'm like,
Right.
wait, I think all of this is true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and that's so true. I think that's how I felt in my learnings as well. My pitta brain also was like, well, it's got to be black or white. Like it has to be this or it has to be this. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, and it's funny, as I've been editing some of the episodes that we're creating here, I'm curious who our audience will end up being because I think that, again, like the Western mind, it's really interesting. Like we like to be told, do this, but don't do this. And this is good, but this is bad. And I even remember when we were in our Ayurvedic health counselor training program and getting really frustrated on certain things because that's what I wanted. I wanted the answers. I wanted to categorize things. And I think part of why we wanted to create this space is it's all nuanced. Like there's so many different ways we can look at it and there's so many different perspectives and it's all true. Like there's so many instances in Ayurvedic medicine where we're talking about like multiple things can be true at once, right? And I think that's where Ayurveda can be not just this healing system for the body, but this shift in perspective of how we look at the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that because, I also resonate with that a lot too. And I think that the pitta type, like learning, I really needed to learn how to soften. And I think there's parts of me that's still learning, right? Because it's like, well, why isn't the answer obvious? Like, why don't I know this? And like, I've been studying this for so long. Why don't I see this answer more clearly right away? And I think it just is because there is so much nuance and there is so much like just working with clients. The more we work with clients, you just see so much more of it. Again, like we were saying, there's usually an overlap of different symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this slow medicine approaches it by, well, let's like try this one thing or these couple things and really see how that feels in the body. Are we
Yeah.
moving in the right direction? Are we on the right track, or do we need to pull back a little bit and try this other direction and see how that goes? And I think, to your point, Rita, so much of what we've been accustomed and kind of trained to think is that it's black and white. And if you have this, you do this. And if you have this, you do this. And that's it. There's like no middle ground, but it's also so extreme, right? If we think about how synthetic drugs are used, there's no scaling back. There's no like easing into it to see if it's the right drug, if you have other side effects. And that's the really beautiful part about using herbal medicine clinically, is that there's a difference between a quarter teaspoon and an eighth of teaspoon.
Mm.
And that's where we really like ease into it without creating other imbalances or other side effects in the body. And that's the beautiful part of this slower medicine.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you just bring me to a thought of we've just touched very briefly on all of these different tools like herbs, like food, like castor oil packs or yoni steaming, or we didn't even talk about Abhyanga. I don't know how we went this whole episode not talking about the Ayurvedic warm herbal oil massage.
That's a first. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But all these different tools, something that you and I are always trying to shout from the rooftops, that there are other options out there besides birth control, besides taking ibuprofen, besides just sucking it up and moving right along. And yeah, like we talked about, different constitutions are going to have different cycles and everyone's going to be prone to different things, but there's so many other options out there. And that's why I think we're doing this, is we just feel like we need to tell more people that and help people understand these options aside from, I don't even know if I want to call birth control an option.
Mm.
We've talked on other episodes, and I always have to do my disclaimer. There's a time and a place for everything. And I think, especially with birth control, I'm so grateful that we have that. And I recognize and honor the shifts that has made to support women in many ways in our world. But to call that an option for period pain, that doesn't make any sense. We're going to just stop the cycle altogether because the period's trying to communicate something to us that is an imbalance.
I'm with you. I've had a lot of clients, and I actually even had another discovery call this week with someone that was like, I have no other options. Like, I've run out of options with Western medicine because they keep just prescribing different synthetic drugs to take, and none of them are working. But they're not looking at it through this lens of understanding how all of these other factors can be medicine and can be balancing and supportive. And I think there's a large demographic of people that might be listening to this where they're in that same boat, where I've gone to Western medicine. I've tried all the things. The only other option from here is surgery, and I don't really want surgery. There has to be another way. That was how I found Ayurveda too. And that's what allowed me to understand the body. Like, the body is asking for something else. Like, I'm literally made of the same tissues as when I look out my window into nature. Like, there's got to be another way to address what's going on here and to support ourselves and to support our menstrual cycles. The birth control is just a band-aid approach because you're not addressing the root cause of what's going on with the imbalance. And to your point, Rita, it totally disregards this whole other aspect of the menstrual cycle, where we're utilizing it as a tool for wisdom. And the menstrual cycle is exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess maybe I'll just add, though, for anyone who's listening to this who is now feeling like, oh, well, I'm on birth control. Should I not be? It's an individual decision. And I think there's situations where if it's the right decision for you, then it's the right decision for you. But I think that what we're really trying to tear down is that being the one option that women are given every single time that something comes up as uncomfortable or irregular in the menstrual cycle. It's the only tool, essentially, that Western medicine is working with. And it's not a tool that's actually healing the cycle. It's just stopping the cycle. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe let's recap kapha, because we didn't do that, and then let's move into what you're talking about, just really understanding, like, what are these signs? What is this communication signaling? So, okay, to recap kapha, we're thinking, earth and water qualities, right? So we're thinking heavier, slower, denser, stagnation. So that can show up in the body as even feeling more heavy in the body, feeling that water retention, that swelling. The longer bleeds, the longer cycles, there's little slowness for them starting, slowness to stopping. Not with spotting, but just with the length of the bleeding and the cycles. More of that emotional component, like that heavier component, maybe turning towards like that emotional eating. Mucousy clots like we talked about, right? More like heavier, larger clotting. Um, and then that like the stickiness, right? Sticky digestion, sluggish digestion, and growths. So those like fibroids and cysts. So that's kind of, to summarize kapha, again, looking at those qualities and then being able to balance them with foods and herbs and lifestyle and all these beautiful practices. So,
Yeah. Well, and you said this earlier, but it might be worth to say one more time. The majority of cycle imbalances that we're seeing are going to be combinations of these. So I don't want that to feel confusing for anybody if they're like, well, I have both the pitta and the kapha or both the vata and the pitta. That's how we do this in Ayurvedic medicine is we figure out which patterns are in excess, we figure out what's at the root of it, and we bring in herbs and foods and practices that are going to support that. So there's a lot of overlap that we're likely to see, and that's okay. That's common, and that's what we work with.
yeah. Yeah, and part of that is just going into the with the expectation that this is a slower medicine for that reason because it is nuanced. So just knowing that we're going to go through a few cycles, right? Like the
Hmm.
body's going to take time with this, and so we're going to take this approach that allows the body to adapt and adjust and see how it feels with the changes.
Mm, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think just honoring like the slow medicine piece of it, the reproductive tissues is our last layer of tissue in the Ayurvedic physiology lens. So in order to create change in that tissue, it can take a little bit of time. But it, it can happen. I mean, we see it happen. We've seen it in our own bodies and in our clients' bodies. Is there anything else that you think should be included in this conversation?
Maybe just to highlight, I think we've covered a lot like specifically for each one, but I also want to highlight that it's not always something physical, like it can
Mm,
be something very emotional or even like mental that we're working on where there's a misalignment somewhere in our life. And there can be this lack of communication or communication in your life that's unclear, right? That can create stagnation in the body because we're thinking about it from this energy perspective. If you're someone who's not using your voice or standing up for yourself or having a presence in the world, where's that energy going? Well, it's kind of staying stuck in the body, right? And if we think about energy, it's creating a block somewhere. And that can be related to blocks in the menstrual cycle that show up in, imbalances that we've talked about. So just highlighting that piece, and that could be covered in like so many different, ways. But that's one I see very often in clients is especially for women, is to suppress how or kind of try to fit into a certain way of being or certain standard and not actually living our own truth and our own vitality.
yeah, and when you're describing that, I'm even thinking of staying in a job that you think about quitting every day for years, or staying in a relationship that you think about leaving every day for years, or, whatever that might be. It can take so many different facets, like you're saying, but I think it's a really important call out in that, yeah, we can get tangible and we can bring in the food and the practices and all of the really practical things, but I do think it's really important we're always zooming out and looking at the bigger picture and taking into consideration the emotional bodies and not just the physical body.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where these signals are really helpful, right? If we're
Yeah.
noticing whatever the imbalance is, well, where is that elsewhere in my life? Right. We've talked about this in terms of digestion. Well, we can
Hmm.
apply it the same way to our menstrual cycle. Like, describe the qualities of what your menstrual cycle feels like.
Hmm.
Where else do you see that in your life?
Yeah.
And is there a relationship there? Usually there is.
Yeah.
And that's where this becomes the wisdom tool that we can lean into. And so it took me a really long time to appreciate having menstrual cycle because I think
Mm,
I was so used to being in this culture of like, it's so easy to not have one. You don't need to. But really, once I stopped fighting it and like
mm,
stopped trying to like, oh no, I have to work out even though my menstrual cycle, I'm going to keep training through it. But yeah, just really honoring the cycle like you're describing earlier, Rita, with your client in like inviting that cycle in. For me, when I did that is when I actually started having healthy, non-painful cycles, and that was a big
mm.
part of it, was, like, releasing that tension in other areas of my life.
Yeah, and I understand it too. I understand why women feel the way that they do about their cycles because of course, if they're painful and uncomfortable or excessively heavy or, whatever it may be, I understand that that's something that we're going to of course dread, and I think that's why it's so important that we're breaking that cycle, if you will, because I do think that yeah, I think it can happen multiple ways. Like we can look at that zoomed out area of our life that needs to change and or I think sometimes we can start to make those like practical changes and have some shifts in our pain cycles or in what's going on in the physical body and then that can allow us to connect with our body more and then that connection with our body can allow us to make those greater changes. But I think if we're in a place where we're feeling really disconnected, we're feeling a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, a lot of mistrust with your body, I think it's hard to jump into that place of like, oh yeah, I'm going to trust these symptoms. I'm going to trust what my body's telling me. And so that's what I love the most about Ayurvedic medicine is I think when I started doing this work, it felt like, oh yeah, I'm helping people with food and with herbs and all these pieces. But what we're really doing is helping women to connect more with their bodies. To me,
Yeah.
that's everything.
Yeah, it's really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I just wanna say I am seeing more and more language and shares and conversations about like the Olympics, for example. They saw athletes sharing, like, I'm on my period right now. Just being more vocal about the menstrual cycle being a part of everyday life and like
Mm,
showing up to work and showing up, to perform or showing up for a meeting or a conference or like whatever it is. And with that language, I'm also seeing yes, we're talking about menstrual cycles and we're talking about how awful they are. And like,
mhm,
hey, I'm on my menstrual cycle and it sucks. And like, this is
mhm,
awful. I want to make sure that we are also talking about how menstrual cycles can be very healthy and non painful. And that's the point of this conversation is that, yes, we're seeing more language out there, which is great that we're talking about it and creating awareness and verbalizing what women are going through. And we also need to ensure that the language with that is this educational piece that menstrual cycles don't have to be detrimental to your health just because you have one. They don't need to be these painful, excruciating, horrible experiences. And that's part of what this conversation was. Like, yes, many women experience imbalances. Most women probably do. And the menstrual cycle is non-linear, right? Like it's fluid in that sense that every month may be slightly different. And that's part of paying attention and part of having awareness and a part of exploring these tools and practices that can support you to find the balance that's healthy for your body. And so I just want to make sure we're talking about that piece of it too, because it's like I get excited when I see people talking about, oh, yes, that's awesome. They're talking about the menstrual cycle and like creating awareness. Like we need that. And there's this other like caveat to it that like I'm on my menstrual cycle and I feel horrible. And I just want to make sure that we're also bringing this type of conversation to the education as well.
yeah, no, I think that's such a good point, and I think, the frequency with which we're seeing menstrual imbalances, like, how common it is for women to have this discomfort with their bleed speaks volumes, right? Like it speaks volumes to things that are off in our society, trying to operate in a world that doesn't operate for us. But also, I think just like the overall energy around having periods and having it be something, like you said, that we don't talk about, or just hearing people talk about it that way and adapting that thought. And so I'm really, really grateful that we're able to shed some differing thoughts while also validating and understanding, like, yeah, if you're having painful cycles, that sucks. I'm sorry. But also, like, that's like we've kept saying, this is not just the curse of being a woman, and let's do something about that. Can I also just add, as you were describing that, it has become one of my favorite things to do in the last year or two, as just being that awkward person who just brings up my period in situations. Like,
Yeah,
I
do
was
you have an
like,
example?
yeah, plenty. Yeah, like just at work, like I'll be around some coworkers. It was all women too, and I was just like, oh yeah, well, I'm on my bleed right now, so I'm just feeling a little tired, and just seeing people's reaction, being like, why are you telling me
Yeah.
that? I'm like,
Yeah.
or like I don't ski when I'm bleeding. And so Bryce had some guy friends come up to ski and they're like, "Oh, you're not coming." I'm like, "Oh no, like I'm bleeding." It's we need more of that. We need more of just normalizing it. And like we've talked about in other episodes, everyone needs to understand women's health, and we need to not have our daughters and our granddaughters be like hiding tampons in their sleeves when they're going to the bathroom. Like, I don't know. Let's just talk about these things.
Well, it's just another area that women are like told and, shaped to suppress these things that we're experiencing.
Yes.
And we've had many conversations about this, especially with like pregnancy loss and like how we're
Yeah.
just expected to like don't talk about it and move back, like making other people feel comfortable in these conversations. And I applaud you for doing that, because I am very vocal about all of these very human body functions, and especially menstruation, and I still find myself hesitating in those moments that you're describing. Like I remember, I don't know, this might be a longer story for another time, but in short, I was in a race, and I had started bleeding that morning in a trail running race, and I got to the aid station and I just felt like awful, right? I mean, understandably so, but there was only men at this aid station and I just wanted to cry, but I felt like I couldn't say I'm on my bleed right now, because there was also this feeling that I would be so judged for it, and like I'm not strong enough, like actually not a good runner. All of these like very negative thoughts that came up for me that I needed to address later and look at and be like, wow, I really wish I had showed up differently for that, and wish that I could have vocalized that I'm bleeding right now. Like, this is not the time to be racing. And if anything, made me more motivated to talk about it, because me, who feels very comfortable in that moment, felt very shied away from expressing that. And so if I'm feeling that as someone who is very vocal about it, I can only imagine what other people experience and how they feel and how they're suppressing what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and that suppressing piece is just such a big point, because I think there's so many levels as women that we're suppressing emotions, suppressing thoughts, suppressing ourselves physically, like trying to make ourselves smaller. And yeah, I think again, when we see how prominent we're seeing things like fibroids and cysts and PCOS and painful periods, like we talked on this last episode, or the last part of this menstrual series, about paid menstrual leave. And, I think I was reflecting on that after and thinking, I wonder how many people are going to think I'm crazy for that. But again, it's like, well, let's look at how rampant menstrual cycle imbalances are. What we're doing is not working. We need to change this. And so, yes, there's going to be this tendency to be like, oh, well, this just like is the way it is, but it's not working. It's not working for any of us. We need to create change. And that's true on so many levels of this world, but it's also very true in these contexts of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anyone's listening who works in HR, let us
Yeah.
know how we can bring this in. Right. Like, how can we cultivate this support for women? Because we're all just going to be better functioning humans if we can move in rhythm with these cycles.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
hmm hmm I'm with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I
anything else that you want to add? I feel like that was like a fun last
was gonna
conversation there.
say, yeah, no, I think I enjoyed this as always. I always have so much fun. I really look
Yeah.
forward to this. And yeah, I think maybe I'll just end by saying that I look forward to hearing people's thoughts on this. And I think as fun as it is for me to talk about this with you, I think that this is really a big part of what's driving us to do this is to create community and create collaboration. So maybe just calling out our Patreon and that is a space that people can connect and chat with us some more and ask questions or just shares and reflections on these episodes, and that we'd love to hear from you and love to hear what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a couple episodes coming up that Rita and I both share about our own journeys with Ayurveda, and mine specifically with painful periods and what that was like for me and going through that. So, if this has intrigued you and you want to like hear a bit more about my personal experience, and Rita, yours too with experiencing IBS and Raynaud's and going through this whole different journey into Ayurveda. Stay tuned because we have some interesting episodes coming up.
This was fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Rita. If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean the world to us and help support our work if you'd like, share, leave a review, as well as subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you use. If you're looking for more connection or would like to support this podcast, we'd love to have you join our Patreon for $5 a month. Here you'll get bonus episodes and access to our community chat Q&A.
And don't forget to check out our wellness library, which is filled with self-guided classes, kitchen tutorials, herbal recipes, and more Ayurvedic practices, all for just $5 a month. Thanks so much for being here with us. Until next time, be well.